Hello. The live streams have recommenced. I don't know for how long. Um, that way you have a beginning in the comments is so lovely. Thank you. Yeah, so I don't know how long school will last, but I would like to do live streams as long as it does. So we shall see. Thank you for coming. It was not a difficult clue. I mean, it was a difficult clue, but there were not like 17 clues. It was just one level of difficulty. So yeah. Um, I have made a little progress since we last spoke. I want to take time to answer your questions and stuff, but I've made a little progress on the Anthropocene Reviewed book. It's actually probably wrong of me to attribute any of this progress to myself, although I've made a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do today is read one of the new essays. Uh, I can't decide if I should read one of the new essays that will be in the book, or maybe in the book, or if I should read one of the ones that'll definitely be in. But I kind of want to read. I kind of want to read you this thing about eating a hot dog in Reykjavik, Iceland. These increasingly absurd reviews where we've gone from writing about trying to write in a meaningful way about climate change to just being like, you know what? All I really have anything to say about is the time I visited Reykjavik when on the edge of the great financial collapse of 2008, which we were of course told was greatest um, the greatest financial challenge of our generation. Turned out to be the greatest financial challenge of that decade. Um, and depending on how you count decades, I guess also the next decade. But I'm not sure that it will be remembered as the greatest financial challenge of our generation. I hope that you are all doing okay and that you're staying safe. And this is a really hard time. This is the hardest time I've ever lived through. And I think if you're not as old as me, you may not have that same amount of perspective, so that it feels like this level of disruption may be more regular than I think than it is or should be, or certainly than it needs to be. It We don't have to have things like this happen very often. In fact, we probably didn't need to have this one happen, but it did. Um, and We're going to get through it, but it's really hard. It's really difficult for me. I know it's difficult for lots of y'all. We can talk about that on the other side. Right now, I'm going to read you this review of a hot dog that I ate once in Reykjavik, Iceland. Bear in mind, I don't speak Icelandic. So all my Icelandic pronunciation is going to be suitably bad. In the summer of 2008, my wife Sarah and I traveled to Europe with another couple, our friends Laura and Ryan. We were still young, or at least we fancied ourselves young. And here there's a footnote. I often hear that people realize they are grown up when they have children, but when my son was born, I didn't feel like an adult in any way. I felt like an extremely young person who, despite having no qualifications and no innate talent, had been hired for the most fraught and dangerous job imaginable. The moment I actually realized I was an adult came 3 years later when I was 36. I was getting dressed for a cocktail party and pulled on a pair of khaki pants, and I said to Sarah, I feel like these make me look like a middle-aged man. And Sarah paused for just a second too long before saying, they look nice. And I said, do I look middle-aged? And she said, John, you are middle-aged. Back to the book. I like Laura and Ryan a lot, but one thing you need to know about them is that they are the sort of people who really try to suck the marrow out of life and make the most of their brief flicker of consciousness and all that crap. This is very different from my style of traveling, wherein I spend most of the day psyching myself up to do one thing, like visit a museum perhaps, and the rest of the day recovering from the one event on my itinerary. The trip took us from Denmark to Sweden and then on to Iceland, a small and mostly rocky island nation in the North Atlantic that attracts tourists primarily by offering free stopovers to anyone who flies Iceland's national airline, Icelandair. I was interested in visiting Iceland because, one, it has a population under 400,000, and I've always been fascinated by tiny nations and how they make it work. And two, my longtime publisher, Julie Strauss Gable, is a frequent visitor to Iceland and has vociferously recommended a certain hot dog stand in Reykjavik. There's another footnote here. Julie has been my editor for almost 20 years now and has edited all of my books, including this one. She's also one of my closest friends. The reason she had occasion to visit Iceland so frequently was because of the children's TV show Lazy Town, which was filmed in Iceland and which co-starred Julie's husband, the puppeteer David Feldman. A lot of nice things have happened for our books over the years, but the nicest was when The Fault in Our Stars was published in Icelandic, a language spoken by fewer than 500,000 people. Breaking into the Icelandic market had long been Julie and I's secret definition of success, and nothing, not the film adaptation or the awards or whatever else, ever felt as good as holding an Icelandic translation of our book. I don't know if I'll include all of that, but it's true. The trips to Sweden and Denmark had been lovely. There were smorgasbords and museums, but the highlight had been an evening spent with Ryan's Swedish relatives who lived on the shores of some vast lake in the Swedish wilderness. They welcomed us to their home and proceeded to get us blisteringly, unprecedentedly drunk on Sweden's national liquor, Bronvin. I do not often drink to excess, but I have an intense fear of hangovers, but I made an exception that evening. They taught us they taught us Swedish drinking songs, and my glass kept getting filled with Bronvin until at last the 80-year-old patriarch of the family stood up and spoke his first words in English of the evening. And now, the sauna. So we got in the sauna. All of this will be critically important later. And I was so drunk that I was pouring cold beer over my head to stay cool in the sauna. And then after a while, Sarah and I stepped outside and walked knee-deep into the lake. And then the 80-year-old patriarch, whose name was, I think, Sten, joined us. And he was standing there completely nude next to the ridiculously modest Americans in their bathing suits. And then Sten clapped me on the back in what was intended to be a firm gesture of camaraderie, but I was unprepared for the strength of his embrace, so I fell face first into the lake. I wasn't injured, but my glasses were thoroughly and irreparably scratched from an encounter with the rocks on the lake bed. And so the next morning, I woke up reminded that my abject fear of hangovers is fully warranted, and also unable to see much on account of the gouges in my eyeglasses. By the time we arrived in Reykjavik, Iceland, 2 days later, I was still hungover, which for me always means a sour churning in the left side of my abdomen, combined with a general desire to melt into the landscape. This is the real crux of a hangover for me. Alcohol consumption increases my vulnerability to despair. I understood that it was only the hangover talking, but the hangover does talk rather loudly. Hangovers also make me quite sensitive to light, which would have been a problem, except that it was a hideously gray morning when we landed in Reykjavik, not just overcast, but misty, like the sky was falling. It was one of those days where you realize that sky is just another human construct, that the sky starts wherever the ground ends. Sky isn't just something way up there, but also something that your head is swimming in all the time. We took a taxi from the airport to the city of Reykjavik, Iceland's largest and really only city. The cab driver was listening to some kind of Icelandic talk radio that was turned up entirely too loud, and I was squeezed between Sarah and Laura in the back seat. As we entered the city, I was struck mostly by the eerie silence. There wasn't a single person out on the streets, even though the weather wasn't that bad. It was a Friday in summer, and I had imagined a small city where people walked all day to the baker and the butcher and the candlestick maker or whatever, but instead the town was utterly still. About 4 blocks from our hotel, the cab driver said, "This is good," and stopped and asked us to pay him. We expressed an interest in his driving us all the way to our hotel, but he said, "No, it is too much. It is too much. What do you say? Much stress." From my perspective, it didn't seem too stressful to drive on these utterly empty streets, but whatever. I'm not an expert in Icelandic driving, so we got out and began wheeling our suitcases down a wide and completely abandoned sidewalk in central Reykjavik. I remember the sound of our suitcases' wheels on the stone tiles, the noise overwhelming amid such abject silence. And then, from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, came a shout, followed by a groan. The entire city, hidden somewhere inside the buildings all around us, seemed to have made the exact same noise at the exact same moment. "That was weird," Ryan said, and we began speculating on why the city was locked down. Maybe there'd been some kind of terrorist threat that tourists weren't made aware of. Maybe it was a national indoor holiday. "Maybe," Laura said, "they're all just watching the same thing on TV." And at that moment, the city's silence burst open. A tremendous roar erupted all around us. People poured out of every doorway, out of homes and stores and bars, and into the streets. They were screaming in exultation, all of them yelling, "Yeah!" Many of them had their faces painted in the colors of the Icelandic flag, and quite a lot of them were openly weeping. A tall fellow around my age picked me up and held me up to the sky like I was Simba in The Lion King, and then embraced me as he wept. "What the fuck is happening?" Sarah asked with her trademark precision. Beers were handed around, and we took some. The initial chaos of screaming soon organized itself into songs that were apparently very moving, because everyone except for us was crying as they sang in the streets. Some people had to sit down on the street curb in order to sob properly. The crowd continued to swell. There are 120,000 people in Reykjavik, and they were all on the streets. All of it seemed on this street. Making it to our hotel was an impossibility now. We were in the throng, amidst some great wave of human experience, and all we could hope for was to hold on to our suitcases. As one song ended and everyone began to shout again, I decided to try it myself. I lifted my unopened can of beer into the air and shouted, "Yeah!" Although I did not know what we were celebrating, I felt wonderful. I loved Iceland. I loved Reykjavik. I loved these people, these whose tears and sweat were smudging their red, white, and blue face paint. Eventually, we were able to ascertain that Iceland had just secured its first ever Summer Olympics medal in the sport of men's team handball. I found myself wondering what event in my home country might lead to such shared celebrations. Cities celebrate when their teams win the World Series or the Super Bowl, but the only time I'd seen any public celebrations of a national event was in 1999, when the US women's national team won the World Cup. I was living in the tiny town of Moose Pass, Alaska at the time, working at a cafe. My colleagues and I were watching the game on a tiny TV in the corner of the shop, and after Brandy Chastain scored the winning penalty kick, I heard horns honking, and after a moment, a single voice from somewhere else in Moose Pass shouted, "Fuck yes, America." I didn't know much about men's team handball. Footnote. Oh, there's a footnote before that to the F yes, America thing. Many years later, in the fall of 2020, I would experience something like a shared public celebration on the Saturday morning when the US presidential election was called for Joe Biden. Almost immediately in Indianapolis, fireworks were exploding all over the city, and throughout my neighborhood, you could hear cheers and applause. But of course, this was not truly a shared national celebration, as many people had supported Biden's opponent. I don't know if I need that. I didn't know much about men's team handball. Footnote, it is one of the only Olympic sports that the US does not participate in, and so was rarely on American TV. But I'm willing to get excited about almost anything in sports, and by the time we got to the hotel a couple hours later, I considered myself a diehard fan of Icelandic men's team handball. I wanted to rest in the hotel and perhaps watch some highlights. The excitement of my beloved team winning an Olympic medal had exhausted me. But my compatriots insisted that we should go out and soak in some Icelandic culture. The crowd had thinned considerably, and it was only early afternoon, so we visited a museum where we learned that because of the Icelandic language has changed so little over the centuries, their classic sagas read like contemporary literature. We saw the chess table where Bobby Fischer defeated Boris Spassky in 1972. And then later that afternoon, we took a tour bus trip to the island's interior, where endless plains of volcanic rock make it feel like you're on another planet. Our tour guide extolled Iceland's many virtues. In Greenland, it is always icy, she said. But here in Iceland, the weather is so mild, they should call Iceland Greenland and Greenland Iceland. Then we all got out of the bus to observe a waterfall. It was 50 degrees Fahrenheit in July, and a cold rain was blowing at us horizontally, rendering umbrellas utterly useless. Shouting to be heard over the wind, the tour guide said, "Iceland has many natural wonders. As you can see, this waterfall is very historic." Even now, I cannot look at a waterfall without thinking, very historic. When we returned to the hotel early that evening, sopping wet and bone cold, I begged my friends for a quiet night in. We'd done so much. Couldn't we just order some room service and watch some handball highlights and go to bed? But no, the marrow had to be sucked out of life. And so I reluctantly followed my wife and friends out into what would have been the evening, except that in summertime Reykjavik, the sun doesn't set until midnight. We walked to Bjarne's Betsu Pilser, the hot dog stand that Julie recommended, and stood in a surprisingly short line before a small building decorated with an anthropomorphic Frankfurter wearing a chef's hat. I'd been told to order one with everything, and I did. A hot dog with remoulade, sweet mustard, and bits of fried onion. The hot dogs at Bjarne's Betsu Pilser are famous. It's featured in travel guides and TV shows. The hot dog stand has been rated on a 5-star scale by thousands of Google users, and like anything that has become exceedingly popular, there is widespread backlash. Many reviews point out that this is, after all, just a hot dog stand. Nothing too special, one wrote. Not that good, had better at a gas station, reported a visitor named Doug. Like Doug, I am often disappointed by much hyped culinary experiences, perhaps because of the weight of expectation, and perhaps because I just don't like food that much. And yet, I found the hot dog at Bjarne's Betsu Pilser not just worthy of the hype, but if anything, underappreciated. I don't even particularly like hot dogs, but that hot dog was among the most joyous culinary experiences of my life. A few months later, in the fall of 2008, an economic recession would sweep the globe, and Iceland would be among the nation's hardest hit, with its currency declining in value by 35% in just a few months. As the recession took hold and credit markets froze, experts said we were experiencing a once-in-a-lifetime economic contraction, although, as it happened, the next once-in-a-lifetime economic contraction was only 12 years away. We should get out of the habit of saying that anything is once in a lifetime. We don't know how long a lifetime is or what might happen in one. And yet, I strongly suspect that our long day in Iceland really was once in a lifetime. On the chilly summer day, Iceland secured their first ever Summer Olympics medal. I ate a hot dog while huddled with my friends. It was the greatest hot dog I've ever eaten. It cured my multi-day hangover and cleared the film from my eyes and sent me out into the Reykjavik night, feeling the kind of close to the chest joy that can't last and also doesn't need to. I give Bjarne's Betsu Pilser 5 stars. I thought that mostly worked. I don't know what you guys think, but I'll find out when I read your comments later. So I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but don't worry if you said anything negative. My feelings are all burned off at this point anyway. The only thing I would like to include, there's this, maybe it's too jokey anyway. Like it's on the edge of being like a humor piece as it is. So like maybe I don't need to make any jokes, but like the thing that gets me about Doug's review, not that good, had better at a gas station. I want to be like, I don't know what kind of gas stations Doug is visiting. Because I just think it's funny. I think it's funny to say, I always think it's funny to say the reviewer's name again. But yeah, I mean, I can't really think of a way to make that joke without shoehorning it in. Yeah, but there is something funny to me about the idea of like, you know, I don't know where Doug hangs out, but like in my neck of the woods, the gas station hot dogs do not quite meet the culinary heights of Bijarin's Betsu Pilser. Um, but I already used culinary in a sort of jokey way, so I don't know. Yeah. So I what I liked about that is that it's a little more lighthearted, and also that as much as I'm suspicious of attempts to say that things are once in a lifetime, there are these there are these like strange and magical days in your life, right? Where you really do have the feeling that anything is possible and that life is, full of strangeness and wonder and beauty. Um, yeah. So yeah. Uh, there's a lot of footnotes in the book. So if you enjoyed those footnotes, just wait till you read the whole book. Because the thing about footnotes that's helpful in the context of this particular book is it's helpful to have your eyes go down and then your eyes come back up, because it's a way that I can make a transition without making a transition. So it's like it's a way that I can recreate or try to recreate the experience when you're listening to a podcast of a long pause and a musical break, like when the music comes in. I've been trying to think about how do I create those moments, that feeling of when the music comes in. And I think one of the ways is just white space, but maybe one of the ways is like your eyes go down and your eyes come back up. The truth is most people don't read footnotes, but I think most people, when they see a footnote, their eyes do go down for a second at least before coming back up. So I don't know. That's my thinking about it anyway. Yeah. That is not entirely my idea, just so I don't seem like I came up with that whole cloth. For one, it's partly Julie's idea. The footnote mentioned Julie Strauss-Gable, who's edited this book and all of my books. She's been my editor since 2002 or 2003, which is amazing. Almost never in publishing does anybody get lucky enough to have one editor for their entire career. And if Julie stays in publishing for, I don't know how much longer, 10 or 15 more years, then I will be able to say that, which is very special and is an incredibly important relationship in my life. And a huge part of the reason why my books are what they are, for better. I was going to say for better or for worse, but it's actually just for better. They are much better than they would be if Julie, than they would be without Julie. But yeah, and then also other, like when footnotes have been used in fiction, like in E. Lockhart's, my favorite example of the way that they're used really well in fiction is E. Lockhart's The Boyfriend List. And there it's very much, it's a little bit of the same thing. It's like, it's competing narratives. So that's one thing I like about footnotes, is the idea that like the footnote narrative can comment on the narrative. Like I tried for years to write this novel where it was narrated by a guy, a kid, but then the manuscript was extensively edited by his best friend, who the book is also about, but the best friend only comments in footnotes. And so then it really is like two novels unfolding, two competing accounts of the same narrative unfolding over time, which I thought was like, I don't know, structurally interesting, but I could never make interesting as a story. It was a very fine line that many people will rightly say I often find myself on the wrong side of. Very fine line between a useful narrative device and a shticky narrative device. So very fine line. And I have been on the wrong side of it before. So I try to think about that a lot. Okay. So that was fun to read that to you. Thank you leave any comments that you have, any corrections that you have. It occurs to me that like, I better look up what time all this happened, because I have a bad memory. I have a very strong habit of conflating time in my mind. Like I actually wrote about this in An Abundance of Catherines, but there was this big study when I was a kid. The sort of seminal news moment of my childhood was the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle, which happened in 1986 when I was 9 years old. And it was very. I lived in Florida, and I was, like we went out to the playground to watch this shuttle launch, and I saw the shuttle disintegrate basically, and like the teachers screamed. It was very intense memory. And there was this big study done like 10 or 15 years later of all of these young people who were asked to write down what they remembered of that day, and everyone had very vivid memories of where they were when the Challenger exploded, what time of day it was, who they were with, and all this other stuff. And almost all of them were wrong about at least one key detail. They would be like, "Oh, it was at night and it was in the morning," or "Oh, I was with this person and they weren't with that person." And they knew that because they had also had that same group of people write an account of what the day was like the day after. And then they asked them like 10 or 15 years later to recall that day. So we insert into our memories all kinds of things to make those memories make sense, to make them more narratively compelling. So I should really look up like what time of day was it, and am I in the clear, or are people going to accuse me of not being a good nonfiction writer, which I'm not, to be fair. So yeah. I think it was somebody said in comments that they always thought about the kids watching it on TV in their classrooms. I think that was actually more traumatic in a lot of ways because the camera was so close up, and I wouldn't have known. I don't know that I would have known that something terrible was happening if the teachers hadn't screamed, which it's just human. I don't blame them. Like it's just a horrible, terrifying thing. And everybody felt more attached to that mission than any other because there was a teacher on board. And so it was just very, very difficult and sad. But yeah, nobody has a good memory is the summary of that. I mean, a few people do. The vast majority of people don't have good memories. So if you have any questions, I'm going to answer questions for like 10 minutes, and then I'm going to go and pick up, do the other stuff I have to do. I don't know how to search for questions though. Oh, look at that. Does that work? Oh, it does work. Latin Alice says people don't read footnotes. No, not really. I mean, I think it depends on the footnote. Like, if you make a good footnote, people will read it, but a lot of people don't. I read a study about that once, but I don't know how real it was. How are footnotes dealt with in audiobooks? Various ways. Sometimes they're cut. Sometimes they're just like put in, and the reader does them sort of as parentheticals. I think that's what I'll try to do. I think I'll try to include as many of them as I can as parentheticals, but I also think like in the audiobook, a lot of the work of the footnotes is going to be done by my voice anyway. So I don't know. But yeah, it's not an easy thing. I think different people have different strategies for doing it. Would you have different editors if you were in more varied genres? Not necessarily. That question is from Ryan. Not necessarily, because, like Julie, for instance, has edited science fiction books and, lots of different kinds of things. But I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it's rare. One reason it's rare is almost never do authors stay with one publisher for their entire career. That's exceptionally uncommon, especially today. And then the other thing is that it's very uncommon now for editors to stay at one publishing house for a really long time. Julie's been at Dutton for 20 years. That's very rare. Most people move move around from house to house to try to get better jobs. And Julie's just been lucky, and I've been lucky to be published. I've been very lucky to be published so well by Dutton for so long, and to not ever have had to like go out and try to find a different publisher. But yeah, that's just I would like to say that it's down to some like talent or something, but it's just pure luck. Do you save these live streams or write down our comments when you edit? Asks Savannah. Yeah, so I do save the live streams, and then I go back to them afterwards, and I read the comments, and I do use the comments to shape what I think about the essay, and things that people liked or that they didn't like. And it also, honestly, the main thing that it's given me though is a way into, like, it's just a way, it's different to read for other people than it is to read for yourself. So I always read out loud when I'm writing, but this is different because it allows me to, Siri, I wasn't talking to you. I think I said seriously. Come on. This is different because it allows, it just sounds different when you're reading for an audience, and then you can see their responses. And also sometimes when you don't respond, I'm like, oh, well, that isn't working because they didn't notice that, or they didn't like that, or whatever. So that's helpful. Kimmy asks, what's something that made you smile over the last week? The Gregory Brothers made a song to the tune of that 525,600 minutes song of the Trump Georgia call. That made me smile. This morning, my son said something very, very interesting. We were talking about why some viruses are seasonal, and we don't know. People say we have a lot of ideas about why viruses might be seasonal, but we don't know, like, why was polio mostly, or still to some extent is, why was polio mostly a summer disease? And why are many coronaviruses mostly winter diseases? Why is influenza mostly a winter disease? And Henry said, well, it's either the behavior of the humans or the behavior of the virus. And I was like, yeah, it's true. So I'm making lunch right now, and my green peppers have been in my fridge for like a week and a half. Are they still good? I mean, I am very food nervous. I have a obsessive fear of contamination, so I'm the worst possible person to ask this. But if my experience is, if the skin is still taut, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, if the green pepper is still green and the skin is still relatively taut, it's fine. I eat green peppers after way more than a week and a half because I grow them, and I can't eat all of them in a week and a half. So, Julie asks if I've had any other memorable meals. I've had a bunch of memorable meals, but what I liked about that memorable meal is that it came out of nowhere and I wasn't expecting it, and I didn't even want to go. Usually when I have a memorable meal, it's like Sarah and I are out somewhere nice and we have a great, conversation and dinner. But like, this was a hot dog on a miserable night in Reykjavik. So, yeah. How was the new year? It was good. We didn't do much, I think, like a lot of people. Bethy asks, what's the best writing advice you've ever been given? It's hard to say. I've gotten so much good writing advice over the years, and I've learned so much from other people. I guess like the most important writing advice I ever got was when I was in college. There were only 2 fiction writing classes at my college. There was like an intro to creative writing and then an advanced fiction writing course. And I actually didn't get into the advanced fiction writing course. There were like 14 applicants and 12 spots, and I was one of the 2 people who didn't get in. And it was pretty devastating to me. Like, I felt like if I really wanted to write, and I felt like, wow, if I'm not one of the 12 best writers in my class at this tiny college, I'm probably not going to have a career as a writer. And after that happened, my P.F. Kluge, the teacher who'd taught my first creative writing class, he asked me to come over to his house, and we sat down, and he poured me a drink. And he said, the story that you submitted was not very good. I think you should have gotten into the class, but the story you submitted wasn't that good. When you tell stories to me or to your classmates, like during the break, like we would have this like 15-minute break in the middle of class. This was back when you had smoke breaks at college. When you tell stories to me or to your classmates, they're great stories and they're funny and they feel alive and they feel really interesting. And when you write, it seems like you're trying to sound like someone other than yourself. It seems like you're trying to sound like John Cheever, or you're trying to sound like Philip Roth. And you're not very good at that. You don't sound like John Cheever and you don't sound like Philip Roth, but you're very, like, the stories you tell are good. And that, I liked that. I appreciated that advice because it was not bullshit. Like, he started out by saying, like, your story wasn't very good. The stories you wrote in my class weren't that good. But you know, he also, I felt like I felt like he meant what he said, and it did change the way I wrote. Like, the next story I wrote by myself on my own, and it was about a recently ordained minister who's on a road trip to back to his hometown after getting ordained, so that he can officiate the wedding of his cousin. And he's kind of breaking up with his girlfriend, and or they're trying to figure out if they're going to break up. And I recently reread that story, and it's not good. I'm not going to lie. It's not very good. Like, I definitely would never want it to see the light of day, but it's so much better than the stuff that I was writing in class. And I think that's because of that advice. So that was the most important advice I ever got. What poetry am I reading right now? Well, right now I'm not reading any poetry. But I just got a book that I've been reading. I want to make sure I get the title right. Rosianna sent me a book for Christmas by Savannah Brown called Sweet Dark, and it's very, very good. So I guess that's what I've been reading. Yeah, it's been good. Do you have any tips on being 15? I hope I'm doing it right, and it kind of sucks. Yeah, I mean, it sucks. I don't have any tips. I mean, the great thing about being 15 is that it ends. Like, I think my experience anyway is that things get a little easier each year of high school. It's so disorienting to be 15. It's so overwhelming. So many of the things that you're doing for the first time. So many of the things you're feeling for the first time. You have so little frame of reference. It's really difficult. And I think sometimes, like, part of the reason it's difficult is that lots of people minimize how hard it is. And they're like, oh, these are the best years of your life. Like, well, first off, this isn't the best year of many people's lives. But secondly, like, even in normal circumstances, it's not true for most people. Like, it's hard. It's really, really hard to deal with the social stuff. You know, like a lot of kids are still learning how much their actions and words can really deeply harm other people. And so that can be really painful for all involved. There's also the academic stuff, which is really hard for a lot of people and very time consuming. There are a lot of pressures on your time. They make you wake up at like 6:15 in the morning, which is an inhumane. Better. It does get better. And, that's not to say that, like, life is a straight line and, every day is better than the last. But As the Liberian proverb goes, no condition is permanent. And I do really take a lot of solace in that. I try to remind myself of that when conditions are really good too. That like no, it's it's equally true when conditions are good as when conditions are bad. Um, Josh says, "What's the process for getting an agent for my wife?" Uh, the process is slow and challenging. I mean, if you write in a genre, I find it helpful to join an organization like children's book writers have the SCBWI. There's the Sci-Fi Writers of America, stuff like that. And those can and you can get a lot of resources there, but mainly you've got to find agents you like and query them. And so the way that I found agents I liked was by reading books that I liked that were in the genre that I was writing in and that I wanted to share a shelf with, and looking in the acknowledgments pages and seeing who those agents were. And then back then there was a book called Literary Marketplace that I'm sure still exists, but now mostly it's on the web. And I would like go and look at their names and find out their addresses and their querying rules and try to follow them. I didn't actually get an agent that way. I ended up getting an agent after my book was published. So there's lots of different ways to do it. And also the way I did it 20 years ago is definitely not the way that it happens now. Have you noticed anything different about the experience of writing essays versus writing fiction? Yeah, it's very different. It's much more cathartic for me, and it's much more personal. I mean, when I write fiction, I'm not even when I'm sort of writing about myself, or like even when I'm writing something that's deeply connected to myself, like Turtles All the Way Down is, it's a fictional novel. It's about a person very different from me, but like in large swaths of it, I was writing about stuff I have really deep, intimate experience with, long-term experience with. And but even then, I wasn't writing for myself. I was writing it. I mean, I was conscious of the fact that I was writing it for an audience. I was writing it, especially for younger people, people who are younger than I am. I was writing it about people who are younger than I am. And so, one of the benefits for me of writing fiction that's published for teenagers has always been that I know I'm not writing about myself, and I know I'm not writing for myself. Like I have to think of it as a gift, because it won't work if I think of it as for myself, because I'm not, 19. But the downside of that, of course, is that like even when it's something that's very, very close to me, and that where I feel it very deeply, there's always a little bit of a disconnection. And when I'm writing essays, like I really am trying to, or at least these essays, I really am trying to understand what I think about something. I am trying to process like, what it's like for my consciousness to interact with this set of circumstances, which is very different from trying to imagine what it's like for someone else's consciousness to interact with a set of circumstances. And so there are things that I like about writing fiction more, definitely. Like I like that sense of making a gift for someone, and making it not about, or insofar as possible, not about me, marginalizing the author if I can't fully kill him. And but then when I'm writing essays, I what I like is that like it is me, and I'm plumbing my own depths, such as they are. Are you a Bears fan? No, I am a I am a Colts fan because I have to be, because I live in Indianapolis and that's all anyone here cares about. It's not personal. Uh, Ryan asks an interesting question about whether or not I've changed things in my books to better fit audiobooks. No. Or another version of that is like, do you change things in your books to better fit translation, international publishing? Which I think is like with The Fault in Our Stars, most of the people who read The Fault in Our Stars didn't read it in English. And the same is probably true for Turtles All the Way Down. And a huge percentage of people who read both those books read them on audio. So, but I don't change anything, not because I wouldn't, or because like I have a problem with changing things, but because I just am not smart enough to know how to write any other way than the way I write. So I'd like to. But yeah, how do you feel about March Madness being played in Indianapolis? I mean, March is a long way away. So I think we will live in a different world in March, but I don't know what kind of different. And so I don't feel like I can have an opinion on anything that's going to happen in March, to be honest with you. Any thoughts about the book cover yet? Oh no. No. I don't have a book cover yet. We're still working on it. Um it's the hardest thing in a lot of ways. No, it's not. Writing the book is way harder. It's hard though, and it's hard especially now because now most of the time people interact with a book cover when they're deciding to buy a book. They don't see the book cover. They see an image of the book cover that's like, and that is a completely different thing. And all of the things that I really love about book covers, the choice of whether to be matte or glossy, the choice of what to deboss and what to emboss, the the little places where book design really matters, none of that is relevant in a world of Amazon and bookshop.org because people see an image of the cover, and that's what they make the choice on. So it's a little bit of uncharted territory for me. I mean, I guess we lived in this world to some extent in 2017 when Turtles All the Way Down came out, but now we really live in it. So, that stuff is so important to me. It's a big part of what I love about books. I am very much, and you can't. Books are a technology that exists for functional reasons, and you can't get too caught up in the beauty of them as objects. But I mean, maybe because of the way I grew up with books, or maybe because I've always liked books a lot, like I am a little caught up in the beauty of them as objects. And so I think that I am probably a little difficult to work with on that front, to be honest with you. I try not to be very difficult, but I think I am probably difficult on that front. But yeah, we're working on it, and the other thing is that like it's just such a different book. So like, how do you visually tell people, hey, you should buy this book, but also like, hey, this is not going to be like The Fault in Our Stars 2 Electric Boogaloo. This is going to be a different, like a fairly different reading experiences. You might still cry, but that's essentially the only thing that it has in common. So I don't know. And then the other thing about it, arguably, is that nobody knows what the word Anthropocene means. And so the Anthropocene Reviewed doesn't make sense as a book title, which it doesn't. But The Fault in Our Stars didn't make sense as a book title either. Paper Towns doesn't really make sense as a book title. Looking for Alaska, probably the worst book title of all time. It's not about the state of Alaska. The only reason you would call your book Looking for Alaska is if you were trying to intentionally catch like local newscasters who have you on their local morning shows and begin by asking you the question, so when did you first visit Alaska, or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a great history of titles. I mean, Rosianna came up with the title for The Fault in Our Stars. So like the title that was really, really successful isn't my title. It's Rosianna's title. So I don't know how much money I owe Rosianna for that, but a lot. I wanted to call The Fault in Our Stars the sequel, which is a terrible title that makes no sense. Oh, yeah. All right, I gotta go. Lauren asks, how do I come up with book titles? Obviously, via a terrible strategy. It depends on the book. Like An Abundance of Catherines, I wrote the title before I wrote the book. I was in a relationship. This is how long ago it was. I didn't even know Sarah. I was in a relationship, and I wrote like a fake index. I wrote like a little book for our anniversary or something, and I wrote like a fake index at the end of the at the end, or like a fake for further reading. And one of the titles for further reading was An Abundance of Catherines. And I was like, that's a pretty good title. So that's how I came up with that title. Looking for Alaska. I mean, I had a title for that book, Misremembering Alaska. for a long time. And I still kind of prefer Misremembering Alaska in some ways, but like it seemed even more about the state somehow. So anyway, it was a friend of mine who suggested it. Um, Paper Towns was, um, I mean, I knew Paper Towns was going to be about Anglo New York, and I was fascinated by the idea of Paper Towns, and had been since like, gosh, my early 20s, maybe when I was like 22, 21 or 22. I went on a road trip and learned about Paper Towns, and like, I'd been trying to write a version of that book ever since then. The Fault in Our Stars, Rosianna came up with. Turtles All the Way Down actually came from an art assignment video. Um, Somebody responded to an art assignment video with a Turtles All the Way Down reference. And I was like, oh, that's how anxiety works. Like, um, I'm thinking about my thoughts, and then I'm thinking about my thoughts, and then I'm thinking about my thoughts. And like, and now, and now we're at inception level, and I can't pull out. And so that I was, from the moment I started to know I was going to be writing about, um, a young woman with OCD, I knew that I was going to call it Turtles All the Way Down. And then the Anthropocene Reviewed, I thought it was funny. I thought it was like, I mean, it came from reading like Google reviews of Mount Everest, or Google reviews of, uh, like, I remember reading Google reviews of the West Fork of the White River here in Indianapolis, and all these people who have opinions about the White. You can't review the White River. It's a river. It run. So yeah, I was like, it's like people are trying to review the Anthropocene, and then I was like, oh, that's the title. So I mean, it's a good. I think it's a good title once you know what the book is about. Hopefully, that's true for The Fault in Our Stars and Turtles All the Way Down too. But they also have the advantage of, both those titles have the advantage of, like, if I am talking to somebody who has absolutely no familiarity with the book but is pretending to, they will often ask me questions about when I got into turtles and whether or not I am interested in astronomy. And so that's helpful background, I guess. Okay. Melody reports that this is a great stream, but it ran a little off course and ran a little too fast. I'm not sure if you're talking about this live stream or the White River, but I give both of them 3.5, 4 stars at best. Thank you all for being here. It's lovely to be with you again, and I will try to do this another time, but no promises, because I mean, time is a flat circle and nobody understands it anymore. So we'll all do our best, and I will see you hopefully next week. But if not, then sometime soon. DFTBA.